Now, President Cyril Ramaphosa has given the green light for the full implementation of the BELA Act. That's the Basic Education Laws Amendment Act then. This is after parties and some civil society organizations raised concerns over at least two clauses. The clauses resulted in some political parties asking for further engagements on the proposed amendments to the language as well as admission policies. Joining us for more reaction then is Dr. Anthea Cereseto, who is the CEO of the Governing Body Foundation. Dr. Anthea, thank you so much for the time then. I'm not going to just ask for your reaction to this, but certainly even just with the two clauses that had been questioned, Clause 4, Clause 5, how exactly does that begin to impact things, do you think, at a future date?
All right, good afternoon. Well, the two concern admission and language, as I'm sure everybody realizes now. And we've also heard earlier today the minister speaking about the plans for dealing with the implementation, particularly of the sections, the amendments that will require regulations. She says she's going to put out guidelines so that schools have those guidelines by the end of January. So that will be guiding admissions and language and some of the other amendments that also require the minister to issue regulations. She's going to put out guidelines. And then she said she is going to draft with public consultation, the usual legislative process. She's going to draft the regulations that will help implement these particular sections and the others. Now, the reason why we need regulations, particularly for admission and language, is to guide the head of departments, the officials in the provincial education departments, when they make final decisions, because that was the contentious matter, that the head of department in a province had final decision-making power. But one of the objections, or the objections lay largely in the fact that people didn't think there was sufficient protection to guide the heads of department to act in a procedurally correct manner, because there wasn't enough information on which to base the administrative actions. The heads of department will perform an administrative action which has to be rational. And in order for it to be rational, criteria are needed. And so the regulations that the minister is going to work on in the next few months will be to determine these criteria, to enable heads of department to act correctly and logically and reasonably as is required under the terms of the Constitution for administrative actions. So what will this do for schools in January? Quite honestly, I don't see very much, except that our organization has advised schools to look at the sections of the amendments that require them to take action, and we've conducted some online training already, and we will do more in January to help schools get ready and prepare themselves. I think what we must really understand is that education's not going to change overnight. And I know people are saying this is a transformation act. And yes, it is. But in fact, most of it's been in place for a long time. It just hasn't been implemented, like corporal punishment. That's been outlawed since 1996, but we know that it still happens and it must not happen. Now there are definitions so that people will know what is corporal punishment. It's pretty obvious. The definition includes you can't kick children. Well, that does sound obvious, but children have been kicked in schools. So there are lots of things that are immediately implementable without regulations being needed to refine the administrative decisions that are to be taken. So we want no more discrimination. We want to help all learners access functional schools where quality can be obtained. Unfortunately, there are some schools that are deemed or seem to be more functional or offer better quality education, and those are overcrowded or they have excessive applications that they can't handle. And there are some schools that the parents are moving away from because they don't believe it meets their needs. So it's no discrimination. And then it's respect for all languages.
Yep.
Mother tongue. It requires more parental involvement, which is not a bad thing. There's much protection for learners in terms of codes of conduct and also rules for SGB, so that SGB members don't stand for election in order to benefit personally, but their job is to act in trust for the school and not to expect payment for coming to meetings, because that's now not allowed. It never was, but now it's specific. They need to recuse themselves, so they can't be going for tenders to do schoolwork. So and my organization have been saying, let's implement. President signed it. Let's get an implementation date, and now let's work with how we're going to put it into place so that we have a fair education system for all learners.
Yeah. Doctor, one thing is for sure, though, Dr. Cereseto, is that getting this implemented is one thing, fully actioned by some of the schools is another thing. You spoke about training, for example, as well, being a very critical and important part of this. How long do you think it's going to take then to fully action it? Because it's going to take understanding, it's going to take schools actually knowing what's going on. And that's a number of schools across the country that's going to have to be implemented to.
Yes, every school in the country is going to have to pay attention. I know the Department of Basic Education and probably the provinces as well have been running training for their officials so that they can start rolling out training to school governing bodies, because the provinces are responsible for training school governing bodies. Then as organizations such as ours, we also run training for our members to help them understand. You know, for some people, these amendments have been billed as something that's going to suddenly make education in the country perfect and everybody's going to access, high quality education immediately. And, grade R's are going to be able to find a free school space immediately. It's not going to happen like that. So some of these things are going to have to be implemented in phases. It is fully implementable because that's what the president said. But in order to implement, you do need a regularized process, and that's what's still got to be worked on. So it's not going to happen overnight, but we do have law to fall back on, and we can say the law says this, and much of it is actually easy to do starting in January. Some of the permissions that are given to schools, which we've been saying, let's get this bill passed so that we can actually start, are very useful for schools. Parents will also be pleased because they have to play a bigger role, and so they can watch that the school finances are managed properly. So those things are not going to take any special action by the minister. There are some sections, including ones that were not contested, such as the minister now has powers to make the regulations about SGBs, whereas before provinces made those rules. So now it will be a national competence, which in our organization's view is a good thing. So I think, as with any law, and we can think of some of the laws in our country, like the Protection of Personal Information Act. It took, 10 years before it actually became something that people were grasping. This will happen much sooner because, of course, there's pressure from all sides to let's deal with this. If there are empty schools, we need to fill those schools. But when is a school full? We don't have those things specified clearly yet. So those things we still need.
I think that's what Doctor was going to actually allude to as well. Then just any more of your concerns, perhaps then, not just with this act, but I suppose the broader conversation still being had around getting what is a transformative action amidst schooling in the country as well. Also, you had spoken about this as well, but just a little bit more detail, the role of or rather school governing bodies. Do you think that has been made clear with regards to this, or is there still a little bit of a question mark with regards to where SGBs stand?
Well, the act is clear, but the original act, the South African Schools Act, gives certain functions to governing bodies and requires them to do certain things. Not a lot is new. There is a little refinement here and a little refinement there, and that's what SGBs need to become aware of. And that's why training will be necessary. Whether it is done by the province, which by law it needs to be done, and as well, and topped up in many cases by associations that schools belong to, we can help people understand these things better. No, school governing bodies don't know all the things that they're supposed to do. And that's why we have organizations such as ourselves. And we wish more schools would belong to governing body associations that are there to support and to guide and to answer queries and to say, is this right? Is it wrong? We really need more functional SGBs across the country, because then we will be able to implement whatever the law is and whatever laws are applicable, because there are more laws like protecting children, all those laws about vetting so we don't have sexual offenders in schools. Those are also laws that SGBs need to deal with. So it's become quite a complex terrain for school governing body members. So people who stand for election need to understand that they're actually taking on a really important role. And it's not a political role. It's not a role at which they gain status or anything like that. It's hard work, and it's learning and being informed and then doing what's best for the children at the school.
Yeah.
And in terms of these amendments that are the contested ones, the understanding of who must they take care of has been broadened. So it's not just the children in the school in 2025. It's the children who might come to the school in the next years from the community. And it's now a broader community rather than the current existing school community. Doctor, that definition has been broadened.
Yeah. Doctor, thank you so much. I think there's a lot of clarification that I suppose comes through not only in previous conversations, but certainly in this one as well. And I hope we can continue to do that so that it is clear, not just for students, but for teachers, for governing bodies, as well as authorities, of course, in and around all of this, and its implementation being absolutely significant to basic education across this country. Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Anthea Cereseto, the CEO then of the Governing Body Foundation.